Recordings of this event, whether they be in person or of a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the league. The league will only allow audio video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, and there may be no modifications to the broadcast whatsoever. So we got the legal stuff out of the way. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start with Proposition 14. I do hope that you got your ballot in the mail the other day. It's starting to come in. If you didn't get it the other day, you'll probably get it within a day or two. So that's really nice. I hope you can follow along. We will be providing a list of resources to everyone by email who registered for this event. So you will have a long list of resources to help you in addition to what we do here. So Proposition 14. Proposition 14 is a bond measure, and it has to do with continuing research on stem cells in the medical treatment of a whole variety of disorders. Proposition 14 would authorize $5.5 billion in state general obligation funds, bonds, for research, education, facility construction, all that kind of stuff in terms of stem cell research. Specifically within that 5.5 billion is 1.5 billion dedicated to central nervous system disorders such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, and epilepsy. A little history, previous measure, Prop 71 was passed in 2004. At that time, stem cell research was very controversial. And that proposition passed by the voters of California established that stem cell research could be conducted here in California, and it authorized $3 billion in bonds at that point in time. There was a governing board established to make sure the money was spent appropriately, an oversight committee, and almost all of that allocation has been used up at this point. Just under half of that money went to UC schools and other public entities, and about 30% went to other nonprofits. The total cost of $5.5 billion in bonds with interest over 30 years is about $7.8 billion. So that's what the actual cost of this measure is. There might be additional costs to Medi-Cal or Medicare if some new treatments for diseases are found, but the legislative analyst was not able to estimate those costs. Each of us is going to say the following. People who support this proposition say. That doesn't mean we agree or disagree that it's true or it's not true. It's only what people say, just for going forward. So people who support Proposition 14 say, there have been 92 FDA-approved clinical trials and 2,900 medical discoveries so far. It is supported by over 70 patient advocate groups, and additional measures for accountability and efficiency have been added to this proposition. People who oppose the proposition say, we can't afford to waste billions during an economic crisis. Only a few federally approved therapies have resulted, and the bureaucracy has serious problems. It was never intended to be permanent. Those signing the arguments for Proposition 14 include the American Association for Cancer Research, the American Diabetes Association, and an executive at the Department of Medicine at Stanford. Those against Proposition 14 were 2 MDs. Money as of September 19th, 9,529,004, 0 opposed. Those 4 include the Robert Klein Financial Corporation, 4.6 million, 2.1 million by a person by the name of Dagmar Dolby. The Diabetes Foundation contributed 1.75 million, and there were others. And again, there is 0 money against. A yes vote authorizes $5.5 billion in state general obligation bonds for research on stem cells, and a no vote means no additional funds will be approved. Proposition 15 will be done by Charlene. Don't forget to unmute, Charlene.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Prop 15 is a constitutional amendment changing the tax on commercial and industrial properties to be assessed on the property's market value instead of purchase price. An exception would be made for properties whose owners have 3 million or less in holdings in California. This change would be phased in starting in 2022, and for properties whose occupants are small businesses, the phase-in would start in 2025 or a date chosen by the legislature. This measure does not apply to residential properties. The state fiscal analyst estimated the ballot initiative would generate between $8 billion and $12 billion in revenue per year. Revenue would be distributed first to the state to supplement decreases in revenue from the state's personal income tax and corporate tax that is due to increased tax deductions. Some money would go to the counties to cover the cost of implementing the measure. And of the remaining funds, which are estimated to be $6.5 billion to $11.5 billion, 60% would go to local governments and special districts, and 40% would go to local school districts and community colleges. 11% of that would go to community colleges, and 89% would go to public and charter schools and county education offices. And schools and colleges are guaranteed to receive a minimum of $100 per student. A yes vote supports this constitutional amendment to require commercial and industrial properties, except those zoned as commercial agriculture, to be taxed based on their market value rather than their purchase price. A no vote opposes this constitutional amendment, thus continuing to tax commercial and industrial properties based on a property's purchase price, with annual increases to the rate of inflation or 2%, whichever is lower. Supporters of this ballot measure include Schools and Communities First Committee, who has raised $42 million as of September 19th. The top donors to this committee include the California Teachers Association at $11.7 million, and the Chan Zuckerberg Advocacy at $7 million, and the SEIU at $7 million. Those who oppose the measure have raised $29 million. $25 million of that has come from a committee called Stop Higher Property Taxes and Save Prop 13. $13 million has been donated by the California Business Roundtable, and $840,000 has been donated by the California Taxpayers Association. That's all I have for Prop 15. I also have Prop 16, so I will continue. Prop 16 is on the ballot as a legislatively referred constitutional amendment. It repeals Proposition 209, the Affirmative Action Amendment. Prop 209 banned the use of affirmative action involving race-based or sex-based preferences in California. A yes vote supports this constitutional amendment to repeal Prop 209 and allows state, local governments, public universities, and other public entities to develop and use affirmative action programs and grant preferences based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin in public employment, public education, and public contracting. A no vote opposes the repeal of 209 and continues to prohibit affirmative action. Fiscal impact, there is no direct fiscal impact estimated at this time because the measure does not require any change to current policies and programs. The measure was sponsored by Assemblyperson Shirley Weber. As of September 19th, support is at 12.5 million, led by the Opportunity for All Coalition. Of that 12.5 million, 5.5 million was donated by M. Quinn Delaney. 1.5 million was donated by Kaiser Foundation Health, and 1 million was donated by Patty Quillian. The opposition is Californians for Equal Rights, which is led by Ward Connolly, who led the Prop 209 campaign. And they have raised $961,000, most of which has come from that PAC. That's all I have for Prop 16. Thank you.
So now Marissa will present Prop 17.
Okay, Prop 17 is about restoring the right to vote after completion of a prison term. So Prop 17 amends the state constitution to restore voting rights to persons who have been disqualified from voting while serving a prison term as soon as they complete their prison term. After someone ends their prison term for a serious crime, they may spend time on parole when they get out. So people on parole must follow certain rules like meeting regularly with a parole officer. Parole usually lasts around 3 years, and about 50,000 people are currently on parole in California. Currently, people on parole are not allowed to vote. The fiscal impact of this measure would be a one-time state cost, likely in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, to update voter registration cards and systems, and increased annual county costs, likely in the hundreds of thousands of dollars statewide for voter registration and ballot materials. Those for Prop 17 say that people on parole pay taxes, so they should be allowed to vote too. Parole is a time for people to rebuild their lives, and voting helps people on parole feel more connected to their communities and increases public safety. It aligns California with other states, and a recent parole commission report found that citizens who complete their prison terms and have their voting rights restored are less likely to commit future crimes. Those against Prop 17 say that parole is a time for serious and violent criminals to prove that they have changed. When people get out of prison, they should complete parole before being allowed to vote, and that it denies justice to crime victims. Those signing arguments for Prop 17 are the League of Women Voters of California, Californians for Safety and Justice, and Assemblymember Kevin McCarty. Those signing arguments against Prop 17 are Crime Victims United of California and State Senator Jim Nielsen and the Election Integrity Project California. As of September 24th, contributions supporting Prop 17 total $582,000, with $410,000 of that coming from Free the Vote California, Yes on Prop 17, and about $172,000 from the Ballot Measure Committee for Democracy and Justice, Yes on Props 16, 17, and 18. And there are $0 in contributions opposing Prop 17. So in summary, a yes vote means people on state parole would be able to register to vote and vote in elections. Certain people on parole would be allowed to run for public office. And a no vote means people on state parole would continue to be unable to vote in California.
And thank you very much. Before we continue, there's been a couple of questions in chat. We will be answering chat questions at the end of the presentation. Please be sure to reference the proposition number that you're asking a question about. We've got a lot of propositions we're going to be talking about. Thank you so much. And we're moving on to Dee Abrams, and she will be talking about Proposition 18.
Okay. Proposition 18 is an amendment to the Constitution. It has received a 2/3 majority vote in both houses, and it would amend the Constitution to allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the general election to vote in the primary and special elections preceding it. They would also be able to vote in local elections if they meet other requirements. Participation in the primary allows young voters a chance to have a say in choosing the candidate they will be voting for in the election and encourages them to become regular voters. Additionally, as they are held in March, 8 months before the general election, it would affect a significant proportion of young people. California would join 18 other states and the District of Columbia in allowing 17-year-olds who will turn 18 by the election to vote in the primary. California also encourages pre-registration for young adults who will be automatically registered at 18. Proposition 18, fiscal effects would cost counties hundreds of thousands of dollars every 2 years for voting materials and at the time of election officials, and hundreds of thousands to update voter registration systems. That's less than 1% of the general fund budget. Supporters include Kevin Mullen and Alex Padilla, Secretary of State, who were the lead legislators in this vote. They argue that there's a low turnout of youth and that a one vote experience can develop civic engagement culture. 17-year-olds work, pay taxes, and can enlist in the military. And and in California, the primary is a particularly important and attractive thing for youth to vote in. The opponents, Ruth Weiss, the Election Integrity Project of California, the Harvard Jowist taxpayers argue that 17-year-olds are legal minors. Under that definition, they're still considered children. They're almost all still living at home and under the influence of their parents, not conducive to independent thought. They will also always still be in high school and under the strong influence of their teachers. Portion of their brains are not fully developed at 17. Funding, the supporters have raised $342,424, and it's a range of supporters. The opponents have not raised any money. That's what I have on Prop 18.
Thank you so much. And we're going to go to Renee. And oops, I just unmuted her and she muted back. Let's see. Renee, can you unmute and tell us all about Prop 19?
Thank you. Okay. All right, Proposition 19 changes certain property tax rules. It's a constitutional amendment. A similar measure was on the 2018 ballot and it was defeated. And so the sponsors are trying again with a few modifications. Okay. Prop 19 modifies some property tax benefits for those over the age of 55 or those who are severely handicapped, giving them the property tax benefit of being able to buy a new home and carry over the tax assessment on their current home. Prop 19 changes the current law in the following ways. It adds to the eligible homeowners, not only the over 55 and severely handicapped, but also those who have lost homes to wildfires or floods. For those, Prop 19, for those 55 or older or the severely disabled, it increases from the current once to 3 times in a lifetime that a new home can replace. It can be replaced and maintain the benefits. Prop 19, if a child or grandchild inherits a property enjoying a reduced tax base, the heirs must live in the home rather than use it as a rental property in order to continue benefiting from the tax benefits. And Prop 19 creates 2 new state funds to basically help counties hire more staff and provide funds for fire suppression and reimburse counties for eligible agencies should Prop 19 cause these counties to lose revenue. These two funds are the California Fire Response Fund and the County Revenue Protection Fund. The state legislative analyst suggests the following fiscal effects. It says that overall, Prop 19 would increase property tax revenue for local governments and schools that in the first few years could increase to about several hundred million per year for each. That the measure would probably allow more people to buy and sell homes, increasing money going to state and local governments to about tens of millions per year, mostly going to the fire funds. The supporters of Prop 19 are the California Realtors Association, which is the major leader in this firm, the president of the California Professional Firefighters, the president of the California for Disability Rights, the National Association of Realtors, and a board member for the California Senior Advocates League. The supporters have raised $19 million, most of which has come from the Board of Realtors. They argue that it gives older residents greater flexibility on where to live. They say that increases fire protection, emergency response, and school funding, and supporters say that it limits property taxes for seniors, wildfire victims, and disabled homeowners. Opponents to Prop 19 include Assemblyman Ken Cooley from Assembly District 8 and John Kupel, president of the Jarvis Taxpayers Association. No funds have been contributed in opposition. The opponents argue that it forces reassessment of inherited home unless a child heir can move into the family home within 1 year, which they feel is unfair. They say that a majority hit major hit on the ability of a parent to take care of their kids by leaving them the family home. And opponents say that children could be forced to sell the family home or small business if they can't move in fast enough. A yes vote would support amending the Constitution to allow eligible homeowners to transfer their tax assessment to replacement home any place in California 3 times. It would insist inherited homes retain tax benefits only if they're lived in as a permanent residence. And it increases funding for wildfire agencies and counties. That is the completion of Prop 19.
Okay, one thing for our presenters, we've been asked to be really clear about what a yes vote and what a no vote is. So if you could just add that to the end of your presentation, I think our audience would be appreciative. Next is Vicki doing Proposition 20.
Great, good morning, thank you. Now, Proposition 20 changes criminal penalties and parole. It's an initiative and it was put on the ballot by petition getting signatures. The question is, should California law be amended to make changes to the process by which people are charged with certain crimes and the process for granting parole? Currently, as you probably know, California has passed 3 measures that have been intended to reduce the state prison population as ordered by the courts. Those measures have brought overall state prison population below 137.5% of capacity as was ordered by the Supreme Court. Many individual prisons, however, are still operating above that percentage. The proposal is that Prop 20 would change provisions of the measures already passed to lower the state prison population. It allows certain theft and fraud crimes to be charged as felonies or misdemeanor. it requires collection of DNA, including on some misdemeanors. It establishes parole criteria for nonviolent offenders and makes other changes to the parole processes. It also expands the list of crimes classified as violent. So a little more detail. It would change the state law to increase criminal penalties for 2 theft-related crimes. It changes how people are released from state prison as far as parole versus probation. It changes Prop 57 process for consideration of release from prison. And it requires state and local law enforcement to collect DNA from adults convicted of shoplifting and some other sex offenses. The DNA samples would be for shoplifting, forging checks, and some domestic violence as well. It also includes penalties, Prop 47, reduced penalties for some crime, and Prop 20 overrules that. So Prop 20 increases penalties for serial theft and organized retail theft. So serial theft is defined as 2 or more past convictions for theft and new crime of more than $250. Organized retail theft would be petty theft or shoplifting 2 or more times in 180 days and more than $250. Prop 20 also allows some theft-related crimes that are currently misdemeanors to be punished as felonies. The fiscal effect, according to the California Legislative Analyst's Office, is difficult to determine, but would probably be in the tens of millions of dollars because it would increase supervision in the community and it would also increase jail times. Supporters of Prop 20 say that Prop 20 reclassifies certain crimes like assault with a deadly weapon, date rape, and child abuse as violent crimes. Prop 20 would not increase the prison population. It would only ensure that people convicted of these crimes serve their full sentences. Prop 20 supporters also say it will help stop car break-ins, shoplifting, and other theft that has been on the rise. Opponents of Prop 20 say it will roll back prison reforms and cost taxpayers millions of dollars annually. Prop 20 slashes mental health and rehab programs that help to prepare people for release from prison and reduce repeat offenses. It will also result in extreme sentences for petty theft and will disproportionately impact vulnerable minorities. Some of the supporters of Prop 20 are PACs named Crime Survivors, Crime Victims Unified, Crime Victims Alliance. It also includes some assembly members, the Orange County Board of Supervisors, and the Association for Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs, and also Albertsons/Safeway. As far as dollars contributed by supporters, there's, as of September 24th, there's been $380,000 contributed for a yes vote on Prop 20. The largest contributor is the Devin Nunes campaign. The opponents of Prop 20 are Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, the Police Chief of San Diego, our former Mayor Jerry Brown, the SEIU, and the ACLU. The contributions as of September 24th were $5.5 million, and the largest contributor is Patty Quillen, who's the spouse of the Netflix CEO, Reed Hastings. So a yes vote means people who commit certain theft-related crimes, such as repeated shoplifting, could receive increased penalties, such as longer jail terms. Additional factors would be considered for the state's process for releasing certain inmates from prison early. Law enforcement would be required to collect DNA samples from adults convicted of certain misdemeanors. A no vote means that penalties for people who commit certain theft-related crimes would not be increased. There would be no change to the state's process for releasing certain inmates from prison early. Law enforcement would continue to be required to collect DNA samples from adults only if they are arrested for a felony or required to register as sex offenders or arsonists. That's it.
Thanks very much, Vicki. We're going to go back to Charlene now for Proposition 21.
Doesn't want to work. There we go. Okay. I think I'm talking. I think you're hearing me. Great. Okay. Prop 21 is the local rent control initiative, which would replace the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995. Prop 21 would allow local governments to adopt rent control on residential property over 15 years old. It allows local limits on annual rent increases to differ from current statewide limits. It allows rent increases on rent-controlled properties of up to 15% over 3 years at the start of a new tenancy. Exempt units owned by persons who own, exempt are units that are owned by persons who own not more than 2 housing units, such as single-family homes, condos, and some duplexes. The fiscal impact is estimated that a potential reduction in state and local revenues could be in the high tens of millions of dollars per year over time. It would depend on the actions by the local communities. Revenue losses could be less or they could be more. A yes vote supports this ballot initiative to allow local governments to enact rent control. A no vote opposes this ballot initiative, thereby continuing to prohibit rent control on housing first occupied after 1995. Entities who support this Proposition 21 include a committee called Renters and Homeowners United to Keep Families in Their Homes. Money spent on this initiative so far is $24 million, and almost all of that, virtually all of that, has come from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation funded a similar initiative in the last general election. And it did not pass, obviously, so they're back again for another try. Those against this Proposition 21 include Californians for Responsible Housing. And the money raised as of September 19th is $42 million against. This has been raised by the Californians for Responsible Housing, who have committed $33.6 million. And the Californians to Protect Affordable Housing, which have committed $7.45 million. And several others like Essex Property Trust, California Business Roundtable, and Equity Residential have contributed in the $5 to $6 million range. So in summary, if you vote yes on Prop 21, you would be supporting the ability for local governments to enact rent control. If you vote no on Prop 21, you would continue to prohibit rent control on housing first occupied after 1995. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. Okay, I'm going to be doing Proposition 22. Proposition 22 is all about the employment classification of what are called electronically mediated or app-based work, such as transportation and delivery company drivers. There are many workers in California and elsewhere who are not employed in a traditional full-time, entitled to benefits, worker compensation, sick leave, and healthcare, the kind of traditional maybe factory job, corporate job, retail job that we think about. These special workers or different workers are called contingent workers. They're called contract workers. They include temporary workers. So it may be including people like domestic and agricultural workers, people who work for temp agencies, summer students, and so on. Or companies will hire contingent workers who are assigned to special projects and it's meant as a part-time fill. Drivers for companies like DoorDash, Uber, and Lyft are now known, we call them now gig workers, and they have been classified as contingent workers. They choose when and where and how much to work. They do not have the protection of full-time employees, and they're not paid for their wait time in between those gigs. An analysis shows that about 70% of them do work more than 30 hours a week. And the average hourly wage, because they're not paid for that wait time, their average hourly wage is somewhere between $11 and $13 an hour. So the state of California legislature passed a law, AB 5, that was supposed to take effect in 2020 to make these workers employees of DoorDash or Lyft or Uber. And that would offer protections, but it would also, of course, restrict the freedom that the drivers currently have. The state's attorney general sued Uber and Lyft to force them to abide by the law, and the case has been in the courts ever since. Every few weeks we hear an update, but currently the case is under appeal. So this law has not yet gone into effect, and what has happened is this proposition was developed as a way of counteracting that law should these companies lose in court. So the proposition would replace AB 5 in terms of gig workers, and it would do the following. It would keep their classification as contractors as opposed to employees. They would not receive employee benefits such as minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, and worker compensation, not as those are defined currently by the state of California. It would set a driver's hours, and it would require drivers to accept certain rides. It would provide a minimum compensation, 120% of the local minimum wage for driving, and about 30 cents per mile driven for other expenses. It requires companies to provide a healthcare subsidy for those who drive at least 25 hours a week, which would be 82% of a typical California premium. So there would be a subsidy on healthcare, and then smaller subsidies for those who drive less hours. It requires companies to provide or make available insurance to cover medical expenses and lost income up to $1 million when a driver is injured while driving. And it would also it's also required to provide disability insurance to up to 66% of weekly earnings. It prohibits working more than 12 hours in any 24-hour period, and it prohibits workplace discrimination. It requires sexual harassment training. It requires the conduct of criminal background checks, and it mandates certain safety training. Fiscal effects, according to the legislative analyst, is that lower costs and higher profits for companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, because they avoid paying for standard employee benefits and protections, which most companies estimated about 20% of a total salary of an employee. This means lower fares and fees for people who use these services. People would take more rides, probably drive up stock earnings, and drivers might make more money, and therefore they might pay more in income taxes. So people who support Proposition 22 say that the law, AB 5, is trying to make it illegal for app-based drivers to work as contractors. Drivers, according to a survey that the supporters are talking about, say the drivers 4-to-1 prefer to work independently. Proposition 22 would protect that right and improves app-based work or gig work by providing additional benefits and expanding public safety protections, and it keeps app-based services affordable. People who oppose 22 say it creates a special exemption for one kind of worker and for certain kinds of companies. They say the wording is deceptive. It creates the impression of protecting workers, but the companies are already required to do things like perform background checks. It would actually, people who oppose it say it would actually eliminate sexual harassment training and the obligation for companies to investigate sexual harassment claims made by both drivers and customers. They say that 70% or more are already working 30 hours or more. They should also have the protections like other full-time workers have. So those signing arguments for California Small Business Association, Independent Drivers Alliance of California, the NAACP. Other supporters are the California Peace Officers, California Sheriffs, and of course, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Postmates, California Chamber of Commerce, and the National Black Chamber of Commerce. Those signing arguments against: Uber driver, and a particular Uber driver, Black Women for Wellness, California Labor Federation, and some others people who are opposed are Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, California Labor Federation, Gig Workers Rising, and Transportation Workers Union. Here's the money that has been contributed for as of September 19th. For $184 million. 50 million from Uber, 48 million from DoorDash, from Lyft, 47 from DoorDash, 27 from Instacart, and 10 million from Postmates. In opposition, 10 million has been contributed. A lot of that is the Transportation Workers Union, 1.5 million. There were two separate contributions from two pieces of the SEIU that totaled 2 million, and United Food Workers for 1 million. So there's a lot of money involved in this proposition. So a yes vote means that drivers for companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash would remain contingent employees or gig employees. They would not become full-time employees of the company. And a no vote means that, assuming that the AB5 is resolved in the courts and the law stands, that those companies would have to be employees of those companies. The court case is not yet resolved. We don't know if AB5 is going to be approved, is going to stand or not, but that's what a no vote would mean if it survives the court challenge. Okay, so that's 22, and we're gonna move to Renee on Proposition 23.
Thank you. Okay, Proposition 23 establishes state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics. This measure also appeared on the ballot in 2018. It may be another of those that sound familiar to you, but it was defeated and the proponents are trying again. People with renal failure either need a kidney transplant or 3 times weekly dialysis in order to stay alive. California has about 600 chronic dialysis clinics serving about 80,000 patients every month. About 70% of these clinics are privately owned, private businesses owned by 2 major corporations, together earning an estimated $3 billion annually. The remainder of the clinics are nonprofits or are at hospitals. What does Prop 23 do? It requires that there be a licensed physician on site at each clinic for all the time that the clinic is working, and which would expand the supervision which is already available from a patient's personal physician. Should the physician not be available, should a physician not be available because there's a shortage, the measure would authorize the State Department of Public Health to allow them up to 1 year to substitute a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. Typically, patient's personal physician, a patient's personal physician designs the protocol for treatment and continues to oversee the patient's care. Federal law says that a patient's personal physician must visit at least once every month during the dialysis process. Prop 23 requires clinics to report dialysis-related infections to state and federal agencies. It prohibits clinics from closing or reducing services without state approvals. The approvals are based on specific criteria. And fourth, it prohibits clinics to refuse treatment based on the source of payment. Congress years ago authorized Medicare to cover dialysis for all patients regardless of age. Medicare and Medi-Cal are available after the patient's own health insurance, if they have any, pays for the first 30 months. Medicare payments to clinics are far lower than what they would get from the private insurers. The fiscal effects, according to the legislative analyst, that to require to have a physician on site at all times would increase costs per clinic by several $100,000 annually. The legislative analyst says that Proposition 23 would increase state Medi-Cal costs and state and local employee retirement health insurance costs by low tens of millions annually, which, according to the legislative analyst, is a minor increase in the state or local government spending. That Prop 23 would put new regulatory responsibilities on the California Department of Public Health, but that the dialysis clinic's annual licensing fees would be adjusted to cover those costs. The supporters of Proposition 23 is the SEIU United Healthcare Workers West, which is sponsoring this measure, the California Labor Federation, a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a dialysis patient, and a dialysis technician. The supporters have contributed $5.56 million so far, most of that from the SEIU union. The supporters argue, one, that these high-profit private clinics have not invested enough in patient safety. Patients deserve better treatment, they say. The supporters say that having a physician on site at all times, not just sometimes, means that during an emergency, the physician can respond immediately. And the supporters say that Prop 23 prevents discrimination based on the source of payments and protects patients in rural communities. The opponents of Prop 23 are essentially Davida and Fresenius, the two private corporations. They also, the California Medical Association, the California State Conference of the NAACP, the executive director of the American Nurses Association in California, and the president of the California Medical Association. The opponents have contributed $93 million to fight this, most of those funds coming from the two private corporations. The opponents argue, one, that Proposition 23 would take thousands of doctors away from hospitals and clinics where they're needed and put them into bureaucratic jobs. The opponents say that dialysis clinics already are strictly regulated and provide high quality care. The opponents of Prop 23 say that it would increase healthcare costs by $320 million annually, due primarily to the need for a physician at every clinic. They say that this would hurt California's already struggling financial people, and that each dialysis patient is already under the care of their own kidney doctor. A yes vote on Prop 23 would require that every clinic have a physician on staff every day, that it would tighten the rules for reporting infection-related information. And your yes vote would require that the state give permission to close or reduce service, or to prohibit basing treatment on the source of payment for care. A no vote would continue as we presently have it.
Thank you very much. And now Marissa is going to take us through Proposition 24.
Okay, Proposition 24 concerns consumer privacy laws. So Prop 24 amends consumer privacy laws by doing 5 things. 1, it will permit consumers to prevent businesses from sharing personal information, to correct inaccurate information, and limits businesses' use of sensitive personal information. 2, it establishes the California Privacy Protection Agency for enforcement and implementation. 3, it changes some of the criteria for which businesses are held to these standards. Or it triples the penalties for violations of consumers under 16. And 5, authorizes civil penalties for theft of consumer login info. So in the current situation, businesses collect info about us and buy and sell that information, whether it comes from public sources or from logins to those businesses. And they can use that information to provide services to other businesses, such as targeted ads. There are currently requirements for businesses to protect this data. Businesses that earn more than $25 million annually, earn 50% or more of annual revenue from selling data, or buy, sell, and share data of 50,000 consumers, households, or devices. Currently, businesses must tell us that they are collecting or selling data. They must comply with personal and data privacy rights, and they must not treat people who use those rights differently from their other customers. Current penalties are up to $2,500 for each violation and $7,500 for an intentional violation. Only the DOJ California can seek these penalties, and companies must guard against data breaches, tell people if they were breached, and pay penalties per event or consumer. So if passed, Prop 24 changes which businesses must meet data privacy requirements. So while this currently applies to businesses that buy, sell, or share data of 50,000 or more consumers, households, or devices, Prop 24 changes these requirements to apply to businesses that buy, sell, or share data of 100,000 consumers or households annually, and it no longer counts devices in that number. Prop 24 changes existing consumer data privacy requirements. So businesses must say how long they hold personal data, and they can refuse to delete certain data like student grades or other information under some circumstances. Prop 24 provides new consumer privacy rights. Consumers could direct businesses to not share their personal data, and businesses must correct data when requested. And consumers could direct businesses to limit use of their sensitive data only to 1, provide requested services and goods, or 2, fulfill key business purposes like customer service. Prop 24 changes the penalties. So there would be a new penalty up to $7,500 for violations of minors. It eliminates the ability of businesses to avoid penalties if the violations are addressed within 30 days. And data breaches of email addresses and passwords would now be subject to penalties. And businesses couldn't avoid those penalties by correcting the issues within 30 days. Prop 24 creates a new state enforcement agency. So some of the DOJ's responsibilities would go over to that agency, like developing regulations, but the DOJ still prosecutes. The fiscal impact of this would be increased costs of about $10 million annually to the state for a new agency. Increased costs for both the DOJ and state court workload are possible, not likely to exceed the low millions. And there could be some increases or decreases in local and state tax revenues, depending on how businesses respond. Those for Prop 24 say that consumers need stronger protections. California enacted the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, but industry tries to weaken it. Corporations track us and our children constantly and abuse that information. Businesses don't keep personal info safe. and Prop 24 will make it harder to weaken privacy laws. Those against Prop 24 say it was written behind closed doors with input from giant tech companies. Its biggest winners will be social media platforms, big tech, and credit reporting organizations. Prop 24 asks you to pay for privacy, and Prop 24 will require consumers to send paperwork to every individual company to get protections. Those signing arguments for Prop 24 are Common Sense Media, the California NAACP, Californians for Consumer Privacy, Consumer Watchdog, and Alastair McTaggart, a real estate developer. Those signing arguments against Prop 24 are Californians for Privacy Now, the Consumer Federation of California, and labor and civil rights leader Dolores Huerta. As of June 30th, the contributions supporting Prop 24 total about $5.425 million, with over $4.5 million of that coming from Alastair McTaggart. And the contributions opposing Prop 24 total $48,000, with $28,000 from Californians for Real Privacy, No on Prop 24, and $20,000 from California Consumer and Privacy Advocates Against Prop 24. So a yes vote supports this initiative. All those changes will go into effect. A no vote opposes this initiative. Nothing changes.
Okay, thank you. And Dee will do Proposition 25. And just in case you thought this was going to be the last one, we do have 2 local measures. So hang on, we're not quite done. Dee, go ahead and take us through 25. Dee, you need to unmute yourself, please. Please unmute there.
Okay. Proposition 25, which is the replace cash bail with risk assessment referendum, is a referendum. So it's a different kind of thing here. Traditionally, people arraigned or arrested in California courts, like every other state, have been detained in prison until their trial, sometimes up to a year, or had the option of cash bail, released by posing a cash bond or property to ensure their return to court on their trial date, when they could redeem the bond. If they lacked the funds, bail bond companies pay the bail and collect the premium. And it's a big industry. In 2018, bail posted to courts amounted to $6 billion, and bond companies got $56 million in fees. The result has been prisons filled with poor people who can't pay for bonds, wealthy people on bail, and a system that measured money rather than the risk to public safety. In 2018, the legislature decided to replace the cash bail system with a system based on public safety and flight risk rather than money, setting up a computer-based assessment entity in each superior court that would assess the risk level of each detainee and make recommendations to the court. Those assessed at low risk to public safety and failure to appear for their trial could be released without bail on a commitment to appear. Those at high risk would be detained. Most people arrested for misdemeanors would be released without assessments. Assessments and release should be completed within 36 hours. There's a detailed list of crimes that would not be eligible for release. In addition, prosecutors could order prisoners for certain crimes not to be eligible for this. SB 10 passed and in 2018, but ran into opposition immediately. The bail bond industry would be wiped out under this legislation. In addition, African Americans, Latinos, and other people of color objected to the computerized assessment system. So almost immediately, the bail bond industry within 2 days actually, began to organize, set up a political action committee called Californians Against the Reckless Bail Scheme, and filed a referendum on the legislation. The referendum got enough signatures. This puts the law on hold until a vote is held on SB 10. A yes vote would approve SB 10 and put the new system into effect. A no vote would disapprove it and maintain the cash bail system. The proposition will determine whether the new system is adopted. Fiscal effects, probably in the mid hundreds of millions, but it's unclear how the law will actually be interpreted. But there probably also would be savings in millions from lower numbers of defendants in jail. The supporter arguments there are that the current system favors the rich, that jails are filled with people who are poor but not dangerous, that the jail space is short, and they argue that the new system would reserve jail for dangerous and not poor people, and misdemeanors are people with misdemeanors would mostly be released without assessment. Opponents argue that the system is biased against African Americans, Latinos, because it uses a computer system. It also argues for the loss of thousands of jobs in the bail industry and that releasing people will make communities less safe. The supporters of the SB 10 include the Democratic Party, a long list of congressional and legislative Democratic representatives, the teachers, the service unions, SIEU, and a fair number of newspaper endorsements. The opponents are mostly, well, the opponents are obviously the bail and insurance agencies, but a long list of business and chamber organization, law enforcement, and city council members of some cities. Funding for this, the supporters have raised $8,341,000. The top 5 donors are 3 individuals, Connie Balmer, Stephen Balmer, John Arnold, and the SIEU, and the Action Now initiative. The top 5, the opponents have raised $9,027,986, and their top donors are the bail bond industries and the bankers insurance companies that support the bail bond industry. Thank you. That's what I had to say.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, would you like me to say a yes vote means that the SB 10 will go into effect and the cash bail will be replaced by this new system. A no vote means that we will maintain the cash bail system.
Yeah, that's important on a referendum. Okay. Next is Vicki on the county measure J. Vicki? Oh. Is that Renee? I'm sorry. Okay, sorry.
All right.
My notes said it was Vicki. Okay, go ahead, Renee.
No, I'm not doing. I was trying to attract Vicki's attention.
Oh, okay. Vicki, if you're not prepared, I will do it.
I don't see her, Jan.
Thank you.
There she is.
So there, I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Thank you, I was waiting to be unmuted. Thank you. So County Measure J is a charter amendment. It is put on the ballot by the Board of Supervisors, the LA County, of course, Board of Supervisors, and it needs a simple majority to pass. The title is a budget allocation for alternatives to incarceration. The question that you'll be voting on is quite long, so I will read it quickly and then I will break it down and explain it more. So the question is, shall the measure annually allocating in the county's budget no less than 10% of the county's locally generated unrestricted revenues in the general fund to address the disproportionate impact of racial injustice through community investment, excuse me, and alternatives to incarceration, and prohibiting using those funds for carceral systems and law enforcement agencies as detailed in the ordinance adopting the proposed charter amendment be adopted? So that's a very long question. So let's break it down a little bit. So what we're talking about are the unrestricted revenues in the general fund. Those revenues, as it says, are unrestricted. The Board of Supervisors on a vote can themselves decide where to use those funds. They are unrestricted, they can use them for anything. This charter amendment would require that 10% of the unrestricted general funds be appropriated. 1 to community investment and 2 to alternatives to incarceration. So those two things can be further defined. Community investment would include youth development programs, job training and low-income jobs, investment in small minority-owned businesses, and also rent assistance, housing vouchers, and transitional housing. The second thing that those funds could be used for are alternatives to incarceration, which could include community-based restorative justice programs, pretrial non-custody services and treatment, and health services, counseling, and mental health and substance use disorder services. The agreement would become effective on July 1st of 2021 and implement the 10% allocation over 3 years with the full set aside in effect by June 30th of 2024. The amendment also authorizes the Board of Supervisors to reduce the 10% allocation with a 4-to-1 vote during declared fiscal emergencies. Okay, so supporters say it's time to reimagine and reinvest in a whole new paradigm for dignity, safety, and health. Reforming LA jails through Measure R was phase 1, and this is phase 2. Also, supporters say allocating 10% towards community investment is what we need for our communities of color to address longstanding inequities and disproportionate incarceration rates. Opponents say the county is facing monumental economic upheaval created by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting prolonged closures and health costs. The county should be even more judicious with taxpayers' dollars and allocate funds accordingly. Unrestricted funds can be used in a variety of ways during this financial crisis, including to close the county's current budget deficit and minimize future layoffs. Opponents also say the proposed charter amendment is a knee-jerk reaction to the recent civic unrest and not the product of thoughtful deliberation from a broad cross-section of stakeholders. Supporters include 4 members of the Board of Supervisors: Janice Hahn, Mark Ridley Thomas, Sheila Kuhl, and Hilda Solis, and also the co-founder of Black Lives Matter and the mayor of Cudahy. Opponents include Catherine Barger, who is on the Board of Supervisors, and I'm not sure if it's Barger or Barger, actually, so I hope I pronounced that correctly. Alex Villanueva, the LA County Sheriff, the Association for LA Deputy Sheriffs, and the Association of Deputy District Attorneys are also opponents. I was unable to locate any dollar contributions. It's very difficult with county measures to find that out. I found out the state propositions are contributions are kept track of in the Cal Access database, but the county ones are not. So I'm unable to give you any dollar contributions opposing or supporting. So what does a yes vote mean? So a yes vote means that you amend the county's charter to require that no less than 10% of the county's general fund be appropriated to community programs and alternatives to incarceration. Authorizes the Board of Supervisors to develop a process to allocate funds, and authorizes the Board of Supervisors to reduce the amount allocated with a vote of 4-1 during a declared fiscal emergency. A no vote opposes amending the county charter and leaves things as they stand. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Okay, so our last proposition is a local Long Beach proposition, and it is called Measure US. And it has to do with raising the tax on oil production in the city of Long Beach at barrel by barrel. So the question is, should we provide funding, additional funding for health services, air and water quality and climate change, increasing childhood education and youth programs, expanding job opportunities, job training opportunities, and maintain other general fund programs. So adopting a oil production tax increase from 15 cents per barrel to 30 cents per barrel. Subject to annual adjustments, it is estimated it would generate about 1.6 million annually until ended by voters, and it would require audits and local control of funds. This proposition, of course, is the result in the huge hit to the budget due to COVID and loss of business and travel and tourism in the city, as well as other losses due to everything being shut down. It is only assessed on oil production companies, so this does not affect individual taxpayers. Therefore, it is a simple majority vote to increase it. There is a separate city special barrel tax that is set at 33 cents per barrel. That goes strictly to police, fire, and public safety funds. This has nothing to do with that special tax. This is only the general obligation tax of 15 cents per barrel right now, and the proposal is to take it to 30 cents a barrel. People who support this proposition say it will help the city address racial inequalities that have surfaced this year and health disparities exposed by the pandemic. It will allow the investment in the community. Oil companies need to pay their fair share in revenue, and money will be used to correct disparities in programs to address health, early childhood education, youth development, violence prevention, and so on. And they say no Long Beach residents will pay this tax. People who oppose this proposition, we don't know what they say because no submissions against were submitted. Those who wrote the argument for were just 5 members of the community, citizens of the community, and there was no further financial analysis at this time. And just as Vicki indicated, it's very difficult to get money in terms of who's supporting and who's opposing. But with no arguments submitted against, I'm suspecting that money opposed to it is pretty low. So I want to take just a moment before we go to general questions. We had a rash of questions about Proposition 25. Proposition 25 is unusual in that rather than it being a separate proposal or proposition, it is a yes/no vote on a law that was passed by the California legislature. That's why Dee spent so much time talking about the law. I believe that's SB 10. So a referendum says, wait a minute, we don't know if we like this law the legislature passed, and implementation of that law is stopped until the voters can say, yes, we support that law, or no, we oppose that law. That's what Proposition 25 is all about. The other questions we will handle in the order that they come up. Kim, you are in charge of our questions, I believe.
Thank you.
Hold on. You need to unmute yourself, please.
All right. So the first two questions that came in were regarding Prop 15. The first wanted to clarify that the floor is 3 million or less. And then secondly, I'll combine the two. If 3 million is the floor, what happens when the valuation of total property exceeds 3 million? Will all properties involved be charged at the present valuation or just the amount over 3 million?
So that would be Charlene answering that question.
Hello. There's not a lot of detail in the information that I gathered, but what I can tell you is that if passed, Prop 15 would generally require that commercial property be reassessed to market value on a periodic basis. There would be no changes in the rules for a reassessment of residential, both owner-occupied and rental, and farm property. Getting to the question, if all of the property owned by a business has a fair market value of 3 million or less, that property would continue to be assessed based on purchase price as adjusted. Reassessment of commercial property would be phased in starting with the tax year 2022, 2023.
I'm hoping that that answers the question on 15. If not, please submit another question. Kim, what's our next one?
The next one is for you, Prop 14. The person asked, I've heard another con on this is because stem cell research is funded by other sources that the state should not be paying or spending money on it. How do pro and con advocates respond to this?
That came up in the analysis. The pro was that the support of this measure is that federal funding is very hit and miss and cannot be counted on for long periods of time. And medical research requires a lot of long-term planning in order to be effective. And then the con was that that federal funds are available, so why are we spending state funds?
Okay, the next question is regarding Prop 16. Please clarify what a yes vote means and what a no vote means.
So that is Charlene again, and a yes vote repeals Prop 209. So a yes vote allows local governments and the state and public universities and other public entities to develop and use affirmative action programs and to provide preferences based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin in public employment, public education, and public contracting. I'll give you an example. In public contracting, in some areas in some local governments like to have local preferences in their public contracting that gives a preference, extra points to local businesses who want to contract with the local government. They can do that, but they can't give any extra points to a business that is minority owned or woman owned because Prop 209 prohibits that. So while there is encouragement for local and state governments to provide outreach for disadvantaged businesses, minority-owned businesses, and women-owned businesses, the actions they can take can only go so far. They can't do anything that would look like a preference, and they can't go too far in establishing specific requirements in hiring and public contracting and public education. So that is a yes vote would allow us to have affirmative action type programs and preferences. A no vote keeps things as they are, in which affirmative action programs and preferences are prohibited currently. So if you vote no, then you want things to stay as they are with affirmative action prohibited.
Okay, thank you. The next question relates to Proposition 19. Can you speak to whether changes in new rules are on the 55-year-old age and then adding severely disabled or homes destroyed by wildfire? Am I to assume these groups are not included now?
Renee, you need to unmute, please. Renee, you need to unmute.
I am not controlling it, you are. Thank you. Okay. The present time, am I coming through now loud and clear? Thank you. The present Constitution says that anyone who is 55 or older or who is severely disabled is eligible for the being able to purchase one time a new home, usually in the same county, and retain or transfer over the tax assessment that they currently have, which is always going to be pretty much lower than the purchase price of a new home. What Prop 19 says is that they're expanding that to include properties that have been destroyed by wildfire and expanding the availability of a purchase of a home any place in California rather than just pretty much in your own county. And so the primary change is just to increase the benefits to people who already have those benefits in the state constitution. That is over 55 or severely handicapped. Does that answer that question?
They can let us know in the chat if they need any further
I-
clarification. Renee, you might want to stay on. The next one is just a general question regarding process. Do all the propositions require a simple majority to pass?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
I would just like to add what means a lot to me is that we are doing the work of the state legislature when we vote on these measures. We are making or changing state law, and that's awesome. And so I hope that everyone, not just leaguers, obviously leaguers know, but everybody realize the enormous responsibility that is burdened on us when we vote on these ballot measures.
Okay. So the next two questions are Prop 22. I think that was Jan.
I had a feeling those would be coming.
So the first one, is 22 only related to drivers or all who identify as temporary/contract? And is it only for those working 30 hours or more?
The answer to the first question is that it is only app-based drivers. So this is specifically for drivers of Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, Postmates, those kinds of apps where you contact the company by your cell phone and you arrange for a driver or a delivery by cell phone app. It does, so that on the 30 hours a week, this is for the companies have to provide a healthcare subsidy for those who drive 25 hours a week. If this proposition is passed, there has to be a healthcare subsidy for those who drive 25 hours a week. Otherwise, all of this is for all of their drivers, as far as I can tell.
Okay. The next question is for Vicky regarding Measure J. And the participant asks, what is oversight and who determines allocation?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to assume that when you're asking about allocation, you mean between the two areas, because the charter amendment specifies the allocation at 10% of unrestricted funds, but does allow the Board of Supervisors by a vote of 4-1 to change that during declared fiscal emergencies. So I think you're probably asking, how is it allocated between what is considered an alternative to incarceration and a community oversight? And there is nothing in the charter amendment that specifies within that 10% exactly how much goes to each other. That's entirely up to the Board of Supervisors. As far as oversight is concerned, there's nothing specific in there about any specific oversight. I want to make an assumption, and I know that's dangerous, but I would assume that whatever oversight the Board of Supervisors is under for how they allocate funds would still apply to Measure J.
Okay, the next question, Jan, I think we're back to you on Long Beach's Measure US.
Mhm.
Will those funds go to the Black Infant Health Program run by the City of Long Beach?
I don't know. It goes back into the general fund, and the only thing that was specified, so that means it can go to anything that is supported out of the general fund. So if that program is currently supported out of the general fund, those monies could go to that program. But this is specifically designed for community healthcare services, air and water quality and climate change, childhood education and youth programs, et cetera. It does not call out any individual program specifically.
Okay, there was also a second question, and I think you just answered it about the funds very specifically earmarked or lumped into the general fund. So I think you just answered
General
that.
fund, yes.
All right, so let's go back to Prop 15. What if the total value of property owned is more than 3 million? And I think that's Charlene.
Mhm.
Thank you. If the total value is more than 3 million and it's not residential property or a farm, then the assessment will be based on the market value.
Exactly.
Commercial property would be taxed based on what the property is worth now. And there are some exceptions related to equipment. But I honestly, when it comes to taxes, I really recommend that you consult a tax expert regarding specific details. But the general issue is going from purchase price to current market value. That's the change.
Okay, the next question doesn't relate to a specific proposition, but evidently you guys are doing such a good job. They're wondering if there will be a forum on the judiciary elections, or do we know if the county league this year is doing one of those?
I don't know anything about the county league. Judiciary appointments, everybody always has an issue with how do I vote on judges. And what the recommendation is that you go to the LA County
Bar Association.
Bar Association. We are sending out to all people who registered for this webinar. You will be getting a list of online resources that include the state ballot measures. It includes Voters Edge. the Ballotpedia information, and it also includes the address for the Bar Association for LA County. When I looked 2 weeks ago, they had not yet updated for November election, so just visit that website regularly for that. What the LA Bar Association gives you for each of the judges on the ballot is qualified, well qualified, or not qualified. Within that range, you probably have enough information to make your decision.
Okay, that is all of the questions that have come in through the chat. Is there any more questions from anybody? This is last call. Okay, no more questions.
Well, then I'll say thank you. This is Jane again. Thank you to all the presenters. Thank you for all of the information. Thank you, Renee. We are spot on at that. We have a very large responsibility in placing our votes this year. Big impact to all of us as Long Beach residents, California residents. And please help all your friends and family go to the places they need to be to get their votes in and counted. And I think we're ready to, Jan did mention we will be sending an email with some information for you. You should be seeing that tomorrow.
And Lisa just posted on chat that she will be posting the recording of this on our website later on today.
Great.
Just in case you want to watch it all over again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.